Hello, I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. As we come to the end of the fertiliser application window for slurry and chemical nitrogen, researcher and enterprise leader at Johnstown Castle, David Wall, gives advice to tackle paddocks low in essential nutrients. David also looks forward to pricing and fertiliser strategy for 2023.
So the closing dates for both chemical fertiliser and from slurry are approaching now. Roughly, we're a month away from chemical fertiliser. So that's the 15th of September. So from the 15th September, we're into the close period, and the final splits or final applications of chemical fertiliser will need to be applied prior to that. For slurry, it's a little bit later. However, there is a rule change this year under nitrates, and the new date is the 8th of October. So all slurry will have to be applied by the 8th of October.
And just to do a bit of a quick fire round, David, I suppose farmers are getting used to regularly completing soil fertility analysis. So, they've been potentially working on it throughout the year. But let's take the scenario where we have a paddock that is low in some of those essential nutrients and see, is there anything we can do between now and the end of the year? So firstly, we might look at a paddock with low pH. So what can we do from a lime perspective to lift pH between now and the end of the year?
Emma-Louise, this is a perfect time of the year, I suppose, to get lime topped up. So if the pH is low and you have a soil test to indicate that the pH is low, the soil test will also give you the recommended lime rate. So that information is there on the soil test, and farmers can go back and look that up. It's a good time of year, I suppose, to apply lime. The soils are still firm underneath, so with the heavy lime spreader, that won't be a problem. Also, the rotation has opened out with the silage blocks, etc., back into the grazing block. So there's plenty of opportunity to get lime out, and you're not following that close with grazing livestock again. So an application of 2 tons of lime, a lorry load of lime will do about 10 acres, which is perfect. And most farms can have 10 acres grazed out and ready for lime. So it's perfect time for lime.
And, when we talk about pricing of fertilisers, everything has increased this year. Where is lime pricing at in terms of ground lime?
So ground limestone is still the same as it always was. There might be a €2 or €3 higher transport charge per tonne, obviously with the price of diesel at the moment, but you're still looking at a tonne of lime in the region of 24 to maybe €30 per tonne. So it's still relatively cheap. The return on investment is still as good as it ever was. Even at those prices, you're getting somewhere between €6 or €7 to €1 spent in terms of lime. So that's still a perfect return on investment.
And looking at P, David, I know that people would talk about they get out with their compounds earlier in the year and maybe into the second and third round in terms of P, but can farmers do anything to lift P on farm at this time of year?
You're correct, Emma-Louise. In terms of phosphorus, we tend to think of phosphorus to the early part of the year, because that's when the biggest response to phosphorus in terms of the growing plant is. So in that March to April window is probably the optimum. However, for farmers that may have some slurry left in the tank, obviously that needs to be emptied to get ready for the close period and the animal housing period as soon as possible. There is an opportunity to target that remaining slurry potentially to paddocks with low phosphorus in particular, but maybe paddocks with low phosphorus or potassium. So again, back to consulting those soil test reports. Most farmers will have soil test reports, and targeting that slurry will give a good return on investment in terms of getting the soil test results and also putting that remaining slurry back on those paddocks where it can contribute to soil P buildup.
And you also refer to K, and naturally there's a good source of K from slurry. But talk through, I suppose, the strategy to lift K in paddocks from now until the end of the year.
So potash is really essential for driving nitrogen use efficiency, and there is a trend there on probably the farms that are growing the most grass for potash to fall, or potash levels to fall in the soil. And the reason for that is where there's more, I suppose, opportunistic bales, or we'll say grass gets strong and bales are taken off, that transports a lot of potash out with that silage or in those bales. So there is a trend there, and it's something that needs to be remedied. Potash is not one of those fertilizer nutrients that is restricted in terms of applications according to the 15th of September. So that's for phosphorus and for nitrogen, chemical phosphorus and nitrogen. They're closed. We can still spread potash. What I would say there is certainly targeting slurry on those fields that we have, maybe even taking off surplus grass off of, or certainly silage ground. That would be the place to put the slurry. However, there is an opportunity here to go back with straight potash if it can be got in terms of supplies of potash. Muriate of potash at a half a bag or a full bag to the hectare will help build those potash levels for the back end and into the spring of next year. And you don't run into issues with grass tetany with freshly calved cows in the spring if it's applied at this time of the year.
And if we look to next year, and you've alluded to it, I suppose the fertiliser into next spring, I suppose, you can't put a figure on it, David, but where are prices at for next year fertiliser wise? Are we going to see them sustaining that high price point, or will they decline?
Louise, if we look at the current, I suppose, price of fuel, the price of natural gas, etc., they're still high, and they will remain high for the foreseeable. So that only spells, I suppose, that fertilizer prices are going to be considerably high, or sustained high prices into next year, certainly into the early part of next year. All the signs are pointing that way. So what I would say to farmers out there is plan for fertilizer prices similar to what they are at the moment. They've been sustained high throughout 2022. There needs to be a plan in place, I suppose, given those high prices, to budget for fertilizer, and also then to use slurries, get your liming done, etc. Anything that can help to increase nitrogen use efficiency if it's chemical nitrogen that we're after. And also not to forget about soil fertility in terms of those P's and K's, because I suppose there is a fear out there that, if we pull back in terms of P's and K's and preferentially buy nitrogen, that the system, it can keep going and keep growing grass at the same rate. However, that's not the case. We can sustain it for 1 year, but possibly into next year, those losses of P's and K's, or fields where P's and K's haven't been applied, will begin to decline in terms of grass yield.
And on that, David, you've made an interesting point that people may have taken the eye off the ball in terms of the say P's and K's on farm this year, given the nature of price. I suppose, have you observed differences in fertiliser strategy overall with farmers in 2022, given the price?
Yeah, I suppose what we have observed is that slurry has been used better. So there's a real positive there in terms of that. I suppose, especially in the spring of the year, slurry was used very carefully in terms of when soil conditions were suitable, when the grass was actively growing. a lot of farmers delayed the application of the first round of slurry or didn't put out as high a rate and conserve slurry for subsequent grazing rounds throughout the year. So that's a real positive and probably something that needs to continue into next spring. In terms of compound fertilizers, I suppose most farmers basically took what they could get, I suppose, with the supply issue in the early part of 2022. It looks like supply is not going to be as much of an issue into 2023. It's probably going to be price that's still sustained at a high level. So supplies will be there, so compounds will be available. And for those farmers that may have preferentially bought nitrogen rather than buying compound fertilizer with the balance of P and K, those farmers will need to top up those P and Ks as they go into 2023. So I suppose there is a little bit of looking at the soil test results, looking at those fields that may be low in terms of P and K, and putting a strategy in place and a fertilizer plan in place to either hit those fields with more slurry or to purchase suitable compounds, your 18-6-12s, your 10-10-20s, to top up those fields in terms of P's and K's to sustain grass growth into 2023.
And another thing, a little bit off point, David, but in relation to the products that we're spreading, when we talk about straight nitrogen, we're talking about urea, protected urea can, and you've referred to, I suppose, some of the popular and powerful, 18-6-12 and 10-20 as alternatives where we are targeting P and K. But I suppose the conversation continues around the use of CAN versus the use of protected urea. I suppose, can you give us, a brief insight into, I suppose, the response in terms of grass production if we're spreading either of those nitrogen sources?
We have much work done both in terms of the research studies, but also in recent years out on farms to really evaluate and look at I suppose, the grass growth responses from the different products. That would be straight urea, protected urea with the lower ammonia emissions, and obviously straight CAN fertilizers or straight nitrogen as calcium ammonium nitrogen. So in those three products, what we have seen and what we observed is that protected urea performed equally as good as CAN throughout different seasons, different years, and different weather conditions. Urea sometimes lagged behind those, especially when the ground was very dry, so the soil was very dry, and we had very sunny weather, so typical summer weather. And that's down to ammonia loss or nitrogen loss as ammonium throughout those drying conditions or very high sunny weather. The protection on the urea is doing what it says on the tin, so it's really working and keeping that nitrogen that would have been lost if it wasn't protected during the summer period. And consequently, what we got was very good growth levels compared with CAN. And what we're seeing now in some of the long-term studies is that extra nitrogen that's being saved there, that's not being lost, is tending to grow more grass on occasion compared with a calcium ammonium nitrogen fertilizer, so a CAN fertilizer that may be more prone to leaching there at certain times of the year. So in the long-term studies, the evidence is that protected urea is giving an advantage even over CAN on occasion. But in the other studies, side by side, they're growing the same amount over the rotation. There is some evidence there, or some anecdotal evidence or some responses coming in from different farmers that they may see a temporary delay in terms of protected urea. that's not transpiring and not resulting in a yield loss or a yield differential compared with CAN. And it may be temporarily, it may be for 3 or 4 days before that protected urea gets absorbed into the plant and begins to grow, but not manifesting itself as a yield difference.
And I guess one of the advantages of protected urea is there's, a much lower environmental footprint relative to CAN. In a sentence, what are the differences there?
Look, at protected urea reduces ammonia emissions and ultimately reduces greenhouse gas emissions compared with calcium, ammonium, nitrogen. And when we look at those in terms of the ask on farmers going forward, we hear it in the news at the moment. It's on the radio every single morning. Protected urea is one of the biggest and main technologies that farmer can achieve those emissions reductions, greenhouse gas emissions reductions, and ammonia emissions reductions without it being a threat to their business in terms of they still have the nitrogen that they need to grow their grass to feed their cows.
If we look at the wider picture then, David, in relation to soil fertility, and you've touched on a lot of essential nutrients already, but, optimum soil fertility is linked to higher levels of productivity, and, there's often numbers put on it. So, optimum lime gives an extra ton of grass relative to lower pH levels in the soil. But I suppose if we look at it from an environmental point of view, is there benefits to achieving optimum soil fertility from an emissions perspective?
Certainly. Look at managing the soil and managing the soil fertility has been and will always be a key technology and a key focus of both grassland and arable farmers or tillage farmers. And there are multiple benefits. So farmers will know about the yield benefits there from lime, P and K, the nitrogen use efficiency benefits that we've looked at in recent times. We can move from about 35% nitrogen use efficiency, where pH, P and K are on the floor, up to approximately 80% nitrogen use efficiency into the grass, where all three are optimized. So just by doing that alone, we're going to get more bang for our buck from our chemical fertilizer. When we think about that, that means that more of that nitrogen is recovered. So if you were spreading 100 kilos of nitrogen, we're getting 80 to 85% of that. So 80 to 85 kilos recovered into the grass. So that means there's less to be lost to the atmosphere in terms of greenhouse gases or to the water in terms of leaching. So there's a benefit straight away. And ultimately, when we look at both getting your pH right, getting up to the target of 6.3 for a ryegrass sward, or all the way up to 6.8 for a grass clover sward, or operating at index 3 compared with index 1, we can directly reduce our greenhouse gas emissions as nitrous oxide. And that's new research hot off the press. And those technologies are also ready for the inventory, so farmers can get credit for both.
Finally then, David, I suppose this is all going to be on show at Johnstown Castle, all of what we have discussed and more at the end of the month, Tuesday the 30th of August. Can you tell us what's there for dairy farmers to see on the day?
So at our open day on the 30th of August, we would welcome all dairy farmers, but all farmers from right across different cohorts, different enterprises, to come and see, I suppose, technologies for farms of the future. So these are technologies that farmers can implement and adopt onto their farms to make them more resilient in terms of production, efficiency, profitability, and environmental sustainability. So things that are maybe of interest, we have the work for the last 4 years on multi-species swards in our spring dairy herd. For the winter milk farms out there, we will have the winter milk dairy cow nutrition work that's going on at Johnstown Castle on show. Obviously, the dairy calf to beef systems, those will be demonstrated, and the latest results shown, where again we have multi-species swards, we have grass clover, and we have those animals on ryegrass swards, and we will be discussing the results from that. Other technologies like the slurry additives work will be demonstrated. Obviously, the low emission technologies, oversown of grassland swards, and a lot more besides. So it's going to be a great day. Plenty of technologies on show. We also have the castle and garden. So if it's a case of making a family day out, that's going to be also available there on the day. So we'd welcome farmers from right across the country, right across enterprises, to come and prepare your farm for the future.
It's something there for everyone, David, and we've touched on a lot of content today, and I'm sure you will be available on the day if there are follow-up questions from any of our listeners. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Emma-Louise.
That's all for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, and my thanks to David Wall for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.